the pictures. They're moving.
I gotta be honest, I didn't actually watch a lot of the early games of some of the series, and I kind of just like
Who does?
I needed like I needed a break for like a week, and then I'm like,
That's okay.
all right, I'll start
did.
tuning in. Yeah,
I sat there and watched a lot of hockey. So and just so as we're finishing this countdown timer, just for everybody as people start coming in and listening to it, thank you for those of you who worked out how to use ESPN. I really appreciate it.
yes.
I'm like I didn't make another video or anything. Anyway,
You've only had a year.
Yeah, and 3 videos. Anyway, enough about that because hello everybody and welcome to another edition of The Extra Shift. I'm Chris here as always with Brendon. How are we going?
Pretty good. Yeah, it's what a first round. We'll talk about all that pretty soon, but it is episode 188. Of course, there are some notable 88s. Some of them still in the playoffs, like Brent Burns. Some of them not in the playoffs, like Patrick Kane, Pasternak, and Vasilevsky. So,
I mean, you forgot to say obvious. I mean, obviously this time because normally I have to stretch the definition. Normally I have to sort of really fight to get it in there in a little bit. But I mean, 88's a really well-loved number, obviously.
Yeah.
Lindros, Nylander, Joe Sakic in 1 year, Pasternak. Exactly. But I normally have to shoehorn the idea of San Jose Sharks legend. But thankfully I don't because Brent Burns makes it so much easier.
Yeah, that's pretty clear, obviously. Willie Nylander, by the way, still in the playoffs.
Yep. I know it's unusual.
It's I mean, look, I think if you asked a lot of people coming in, which of that list they expected to see in the second round, they probably wouldn't right, including some of us.
Although some of us did. Anyway, so let's get on to it. And the news we're going to get into before we get anywhere near what happened in the last week, because nothing's really happened in the last 2 weeks. It's been quiet and there's been no stories whatsoever. But the Calgary Flames, first of all, agreed to part ways mutually with Brad Treliving. Now, this was the first announcement. I think it was the day after the podcast we were talking, where I was speculating on. I thought that Brad Treliving might go somewhere else, and like somebody's going to take him for a GM job somewhere, which I still think is going to happen. But it's really interesting because Treliving went, and they promoted Don Maloney to president of hockey ops and interim general manager. Now, what sort of came out in information today was that there had been Frank Saravalli reported that one of the reasons why Treliving decided that he wasn't coming back, it wasn't mutual in terms of it was both their decision. Treliving said, I'm not re-signing. And a large part of that was believed to be from Saravalli that Treliving said, I need to make a coaching change. And the ownership said, no, you can't make a coaching change. We've just signed him to an extension that's about to kick in for 2 more years. So, no, you can't make the coaching change. So Treliving went, I'm out. They then brought in Don Maloney to do the end-of-season interviews and the review of what went wrong. As was pointed out today, by the way, Calgary had 1 more point than the second-round destined Florida Panthers. Just want to put that out there. But what the review found was that Daryl Sutter needed to go. So Daryl Sutter has today been fired as the coach of the Calgary Flames. So after the general manager quits because he can't sack the coach, they do a massive internal review and find they have to sack the coach.
I mean, look, if only they'd asked like anyone a year ago, like they really could have told them that Sutter wasn't going to, like, I mean, we talked about it coming into this season that, they went and made a bunch of, changes to their personnel. They brought in guys like Huberdeau and Kadri and so forth. And it just didn't seem like these were, Daryl Sutter players. Like
that was the comment when we did the trade conversation. My thing that I said was, I don't know if he knows what to do with Jonathan Huberdeau.
No, unsurprisingly, Huberdeau's obviously had like an awful season, by his standards after, putting up, 100 plus points the year before, just, stunk it up in Calgary because he is just not a Daryl Sutter player. And it just never seemed like there was, the connections there just weren't happening. It was just all, one side seemed to think that they were doing one thing and the other side were doing another. And there was just no kind of synergy there.
So what's sort of come out in the last 24 hours? Well, it's been coming out for a while, but the level of vitriol, and the word vitriol has popped up a few times. So what Frank Saravelli? So first of all, Don Maloney in the press conference said that he spoke to 35 players, coaching staff, agents, and it became clear we needed to find a new voice. Now, I find it really interesting that he mentioned we needed to find a new voice after speaking to agents. Because one of the things you'd started to hear from a few players was, if Sutter's back, trade me.
Yeah, I'm out.
And the whispers had been getting louder and louder that a lot of players had been saying to their agents, if they're going to bring him back, I want to trade. I want out.
Yeah.
I'm not coming back for this again. But it's really interesting. So Frank Saravelli's comment was, he alienated so many people in the organization, from the front office to the assistant coaches to the vast majority of the locker room. There was such vitriol during the exit interviews, they had no choice. They were slightly upset.
No, it was pretty clear.
Vitriol. It was, do not, under any circumstances, bring that man back. And that was followed up by Julian McKenzie, who brought up that Bob Hartley, the former coach, interviewed Jonathan Huberdeau on radio and asked him about the handling of the Jacob Peltier. Remember the rookie who, for those who don't remember, the rookie who played his first game, and everyone asked what he thought of his first night. And Sutter went, what number was he again? Give me the sheet, and read his stats. Yeah, it's okay. Like he didn't know who the player was. But then privately in the locker room, went up to him, talked about what a great game he did, went through all this stuff. And when they asked Huberdeau about it, he goes, why say that to the media and then go see the kid to tell him that he played well? It's like everyone in the locker room was just, they said he was old, curmudgeonly, angry with everyone, decided that he was going to double down on rage being the thing that was going to motivate everybody. And also after that interview, and I didn't know this, but this was in the Sportsnet article about it. After that interview, management spoke to him very sternly, and the president of the Flames was at the next press conference standing off to the side, monitoring every word Sutter said, at which point Sutter started going overboard about the young players and gushing about how amazing they were. So from that point, it just feels like the front office had gone, this is interesting. But my question is, why do you let Treliving walk if his request was get rid of the coach? And the signs seem to be pointing to the fact that anybody in the organization with a pulse was going, no, Daryl's got to go.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like there was, a lot of misconnections there in terms of, the GM, ownership, and the coach were all on three separate pages, and it's just unfortunate that they didn't all, at least like ownership and the GM get on the same page at the same time first before they kind of decided to kind of work out what was going on. Maybe look, there's probably other elements to it. I imagine that. The entire reason that Treliving left wasn't just the coaching thing. Maybe that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
It was the thing that pushed it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's probably okay, well, I'm not actually that happy about it, but if you want me to stick around, this is what you got to give me. And they're like, oh, well, look,
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure he's going to find himself in a general manager job really, really fast, somewhere else. The other interesting part was that they said that Gaudreau and Tkachuk were both sort of talking about the idea of moving before any of this sort of went down. But they said once Sutter got coach of the year, and that basically meant that he was getting an extension, that sped the process up. So they were always going to at least explore the option of going somewhere else. But when they were going to explore the idea of going somewhere else, it was, we'll explore it, but we're open to conversation. Once they knew Sutter was extended, that was dead. Also, Lindholm and Backlund have both made it plain that they want to go somewhere else. But Backlund has apparently now said that he's happy to see what the organization puts forward first. So,
yeah, I'm very curious to see what they do from here, because I could see a situation where they bring in a coach that actually kind of works with the players that they have. You know, they bring in like a kind of forward thinking, offensively minded coach, and let Huberdeau cook, basically. Let them play a style that is conducive to the players that they have. I mean, like, I think that there's still extra stuff that needs to get done there. I don't think the Flames realistically still the team that they were with, Kachuk and Gaudreau and so forth.
I think they've got a fairly. We've talked about the idea of them having a fairly sizable build. I think they've got a fairly tricky build ahead of them now.
Yeah. I think they're further away than people thought that they were a year ago, and
the worst part about it,
the
worst part about it for Flames fans too is that they're starting the rebuild in a Pacific where LA's short-circuited the rebuild and done it faster. The Ducks are in a really good position to be drafting incredibly high this draft. At the moment, best odds, second best odds for Bedard. The Sharks are in with a chance at a top 3, top 4 pick as well. So there's a good chance that some of these teams that got to this a little bit earlier are going to be able to short circuit this and make this a bit faster. Whereas the Flames have still got to tear down, and they've also got no moves. So
they're one of those many teams in the murky middle that's hard to do anything.
Like the Nazem Kadri contract. Like, everyone knew that Kadri was going to have a massive drop-off when he went to Calgary. No one is surprised by that.
Yeah.
But the fact that contract is a no move, means they can't shift it. They're stuck. And so they've just got to make
I can't see them committing to a rebuild. I can't see them committing to a long term. I think that they're going to try and retool, maybe for a couple more years until it's too late, and then they realize that they have to commit to it. I don't know. I don't see who they have coming up that's going to change their.
They've also tied themselves to Markstrom, and that's a no move as well, and that's $6 million for the next 4 years. So, they've got.
I think they are who they are. That's the thing. Like, if they can find a way to make,
Noah Hannafin crying at this point in time.
and try and make basically, if they can make Huberdeau productive, find something that works for him. Like, maybe
they find a coach that will be active. I'm worried that there's going to be a coach swap, because I think that when we'll get to it in the recap, but there's a team that I'm pretty sure by tomorrow morning will have sacked their head coach, and it really wouldn't shock me if there was a coach swap. And maybe Daryl Sutter finds himself in New York City and Gerard Gallant finds himself in Calgary. But I think it would be stupid for both organizations. Let me just say that straight up. But, I mean, Gerard Gallant has a habit of failing.
We know how this coaching carousel works.
And we know that the Rangers believe. We know the Rangers believe in this grit. So, all these offensive players, and what they went for was grit. Anyway, we'll get to the Rangers later. Let's move on. Because before we get to the playoffs as well, I wanted to mention a little note, just because I want to annoy everybody. So, on the 32 Thoughts podcast that was out today, Elliot Friedman, they were talking about that Bruins locker room and talking about, is this going to be the end for Bergeron in particular? And he casually mentioned that Boston were originally the team that was chosen to come to Australia for the Australian series.
Well, that's what we heard in the original kind of rumors. Like, there was 3 or 4 teams that were mentioned as potentials, but Boston was the kind of headline.
So what was confirmed was that they were picked, and then it was a team vote. And the reason we know about this was that Elliot Friedman's comment was that there were a lot of conversations from Bergeron. He goes, I don't know what I'm doing next year. Should I even vote? Because do you want me to vote or not? Because if I'm not there, then I'm voting, but you've all got to go with what I've decided, So he just mentioned it as part of that. And I'm like, well, we've actually now got confirmation, because all those teams were mentioned, but we've now got confirmation. Boston were originally supposed to be the headline team, but there was a player vote. And the players said no. So next time you say, why did the NHL pick, Arizona to come out here? They picked Boston, and Boston said no.
Yeah.
So teams have the option of going, I'm not doing that. Right, so,
I mean, fair enough to some extent. Like, I think that
You don't want to do that trip at the start of the season.
No, well, yeah, that too. But like, if we look back kind of historically, I think LA did it a few years back, and we're just really knocked around by it when they did I think that was the China one.
Yep. LA and Vancouver.
And Vancouver had, like some of the, I remember hearing people talk about like some of the older players and so forth, had a really hard time kind of adjusting to that schedule, playing those games, getting the, overcoming the jet lag, and then basically having like, being like a bunch of games behind at the start of the season and then having to come back.
The Sharks at the start of this season went over to Europe and played in Europe, and we didn't recover for 82 games. So
that's it. That was the whole reason.
Problem was we went and played in Europe first, and so 82 games.
At least it is. Was that a regular season game or was that a preseason game?
Yeah, it was a regular season game.
Because I think that maybe that's part of the reason that they've shifted this. Maybe that's part of the reason they've shifted this to be a preseason game, because teams can. But I think that the China one was a preseason game as well. I want to say, I can't remember.
China was preseason.
I want to say the Vancouver one was like a first game of it. There was definitely, they've done some as like the first 2 games of the season for some teams, and it just messes their entire schedule up.
The San Jose one at the start of the year was a 2-game series, and then they came back and they started early, and then they got 2 weeks off to come back. That was the deal. Was they got 2 weeks off after they returned to. But
I mean, Australia is especially brutal. Like it's a 22 hour flight, opposite time zone. Play back to back and then fly back and then start.
Really hard. It's really hard to get any form of ice time whatsoever at like the Ice House in Melbourne or Macquarie Rink in Sydney is always taken up by figure skaters and learn to skate. So it's just really hard. Like it's almost impossible. LCC's taken up all the time. Penrith Rink's terrible. So it's hard to get ice time.
I think we'll see the Coyotes down at Oakley. It's about the size of the usual rink.
More spectators than they're used to be fair. I mean,
it's the same.
They do a warm up at Oakley, and they're like, "What the hell? I've never seen so many people."
Yeah, I want to see them drop in off the bench to the extra drop, and fucking someone break their ankles on the. Yeah,
I just want to see them playing at Macquarie Rink so they can have everybody up at the McDonald's, like looking over the glass. It's one of my favorite parts of that rink is just watching everyone up at McDonald's going, "What are they doing down there?" And then during game days when they're trying to actually play games and they've got curtains up and everyone's like, "It's a curtain, just peek through the curtain." So let's get into the playoffs, shall we? So things that aren't being played in rinky-dink university arenas. The playoffs. That could have been really interesting, couldn't it, by the way, if Arizona made the playoffs.
Imagine Arizona made it and people had to go to Mullet Arena for that'd be incredible.
Oh, we've missed out on the joy that is the idea that the Arizona Coyotes parading a Stanley Cup around Mullet Arena. Just imagine the crowd.
Imagine the atmosphere of the playoff game in that tiny arena. It would be incredible.
University shit. Skull. It's just the cup is being passed to every person in the arena.
It would be wild. Absolutely wild.
It's the greatest kegger in history right now happening at the Mullet Arena. It's a mist. You've got one more year to sort your crap out. By the way, just quickly, I'm going to get to the past, but just quickly while we're mentioning Arizona, there was an article put out yesterday that popped up on the Australian NHL Facebook fans, which was about they could move and they're looking at Houston. No, the vote that's coming up is the vote about the entertainment complex around the new arena, which there's a challenge going on with condos and like affording housing and stuff like that. The long and the short of it is it's not happening. They're not moving the team. Even if the vote doesn't go the way they want, they will still build the arena. They will still play in the arena. It's about there's going to be more legal challenges around the entertainment complex, which will happen.
Honestly, a lot of the money, in doing that kind of thing is owning the, all of the stuff around it. But
so for everyone who's getting their hopes up on either the Coyotes being dragged to Quebec, which first of all is not happening, or secondly becoming the Houston Coyotes, and that's not happening. We are going to talk later about another team, however, that could move, but we'll bring them up later. We're going to get into the playoffs for now. So let's start with the series that we also are coming. Seattle defeats Colorado in 7 games.
Oh boy, yeah.
So this wiped out my bracket completely because I had Colorado winning the cup.
I had them in the cup final too, as we'll talk about soon. But look, I think the thing for me, like the real main takeaway for this is that everyone slept on Seattle, which is easy to do.
That's
Like,
that's almost a film pun. Quality work.
it is. Or no, yeah, no, I'm not going to try and turn that into something more.
No, don't.
But I mean, realistically, I can understand. Everyone. Especially with their first year, they came out, built their team. It wasn't as impressive as people were expecting it to be. But this year they managed to basically turn what was like a solid defensive team with a really, really bad offense into one of like the most effective offenses in the league quietly. Like they've led in the regular season, been, one of the top teams in expected goals and actual scoring goals in the last year. But it's kind of quietly happened through committee. It's not been a thing where they've had, 60 goal scorers or anything like that. They've had a bunch of 30 goal scorers, and they've just had this, buzzsaw offense up and down their lineup that they've really like. I think, had I looked into it a little bit further, looking at the depth of Colorado, especially with some of the injuries that they've had and the fact, through the year and also coming into the playoffs, what kind of played out realistically when they got on the ice is that Colorado, like after McKinnon and Brendon left the ice, just didn't really have anything that stood up to the depth that Seattle had.
It was really interesting. Nathan McKinnon tried to Connor McDavid. I'm going to say
yeah.
Nathan McKinnon, when he was on the ice, basically said, I would like another Stanley Cup, thank you, and did everything in his power to carry he was the entirety of the offense for the Avalanche.
And he almost did it.
And McKinnon was the whole reason those periods where they look good, it's McKinnon. And what was really intriguing for me, Dave Hextall did something that I wasn't expecting him to be able to do, which was just organize efficiently. He didn't do anything flashy. He just organized so efficiently and effectively that once, a bit like what I talk about when I talk about teams countering Edmonton, which is, it's 29-97. If you counter those two, limit the damage while they're on the ice, and when they leave, attack, you've got a chance, and that's how you beat them. But that's what they basically did. Nathan McKinnon was going to be Nathan McKinnon. So they let him do that. And when Nathan McKinnon left the ice, Seattle went to work and just efficiently drummed the second line, the third line, the fourth line.
Yeah, they just beat them on the check.
And made them make mistakes and made them make rash decisions they don't normally make. That leads us to Cale Makar. Now, I was very popular the other day for an opinion on Cale Makar. So Makar was suspended for one game for a hit on McCann. Now McCann missed the rest of the series with the injury. Obviously, as I've now been told many times, it was a perfectly clean hit by the cleanest player in the game, and he has a perfect track record, and he's not a dirty player, and therefore the hit was not dirty. I suggested that he possibly should have got 2 games. Now,
a shocking difference of 1 game.
I know. I'm washed and I've lost it, and I'm out of touch. Look, at no point have I said Cale Makar's a dirty player. He's one of my favorite players to watch. No one thinks Cale Makar's dirty. You can be a not dirty player and lay an incredibly dirty hit.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And what Makar did was incredible. The puck is nowhere. It's not in the vicinity. It is gone. And it is a brutal hit. And he should have gone. Absolutely should have gone. He got 1, and everyone went, well, with the playoffs, it's fair for 1. I said I thought it should have been 2 because I thought it was that bad. I wasn't crying bloody murder over the fact that it was 1, but again, what you then saw was, for some reason, and what happened, Colorado fans, who hurt you? Because suddenly it was, no, he shouldn't have got anything. It was a fair hit. It wasn't fair, guys. It wasn't a clean hit. There's
a whole bunch of people within the hockey community who think that should have kept his head up is like the kill all like response to anyone getting hit by anything at any time. Like anyone is fair game because anyone who gets hit should have kept their head up. That's all you need to say, and it's all every hit is clean. You just should have been looking.
And just for the record, before I do get accused of hating Colorado, first of all, I tipped them to win the cup, and I love watching them play, so I'm not against them. But secondly, Jordan Eberle should have gone too. Eberle's hit on Cogliano, he should have gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was spoken about that if Cogliano didn't get up, he might have, but because Cogliano got up, they went, it's fine.
It's fine. Just a fractured neck. It's fine.
The officiating in the first round of the playoffs across the board, and it wasn't biased towards one team. Awful. Across the board, it is possibly the worst officiating we've ever seen.
And the fact that they had national broadcasters talking about on the audio,
because they're told not to.
Yeah, basically, but they're pretty much admitting, saying Toronto's taken a couple of penalties or whatever in the first period, so that we'll probably see an even up call for Tampa very soon or whatever. The fact that they're saying the quiet part out loud. This is the thing that is supposed to be.
Marc Messier, the man who makes no controversial statement ever, said he has never seen officiating this bad.
Yeah.
Right. And he doesn't say anything ever. He gives no quotes. On that panel for TN, he is the most boring thing on that panel. Because he says absolutely nothing. He was going.
I don't think he's right in the regard that I think it's been this bad for a long time, but it's finally gotten to the point where people are willing to are just over it and are willing to.
There's a problem when Wes McCauley had the game that he had in the Leafs game, the first Leafs game. And everyone went, it's just Leafs fans. Then Wes McCauley turned up in another series, and I think it was game 3 of another series. And everyone went, oh, my God, Wes McCauley, that's terrible. Then he turned up in the Rangers series, and everyone's like, Wes McCauley, oh, my God, that's terrible. Maybe the problem is Wes McCauley. I'm just going to put it out there. Somebody who basically built his reputation off making really fun, loud proclamations when he calls a penalty might not necessarily just be a good ref. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I think that certainly there are some refs that are bigger culprits.
But he's symptomatic of
it's a culture of how and it's not even necessarily on them. It's just how the NHL to this point has kind of developed the concept of refereeing. It is literally just how everyone accepts it. Everyone knows that they are playing to a storyline almost in terms of calling calls and so forth. And what happens on the ice doesn't actually matter. It is wrestling at this point. It has always gotten to the point where the ref is almost pretending that covering his eyes, pretending he can't see something directly in front of him. The kayfabe has gone completely off the charts, where it's pretending that he's oh no, I'm tying my shoe while someone's getting stabbed. It's
the equivalency of a ref bump. But the interesting part, with it, Jay Fresh had the stats, and I'm pretty sure the Athletic put the stats out too, is the number of calls per game. And again, game 1 and game 2, things get called. Game 3, it goes down a bit more. Game 4, and then 5, 6, and 7 is do whatever you want. And in the Leafs game example, the Leafs Tampa game, there were a couple of blown calls where the Leafs didn't get penalties, and then Hagel got hit in the face in the last 5 seconds of the game, and because he kept skating, they went, he's fine. So that should have been a call too. But it's so
it's like that over the course of several series too. As it gets closer to the cup final, less and less gets called. The stats are effectively were that there's actually a tiny uptick in the amount of penalties that are called during the playoffs compared to the regular season, but the vast majority of those are in round 1.
Game 1.
Yeah, they're kind of we're setting the pace, whatever in the first couple of games, and then it just gets the whistles get thrown out by the end of the playoffs.
So we'll quickly finish off this because Seattle and Colorado, because that point will be raised in the second series we're going to talk about, which was just a brawl. But basically, the interesting part is, have you ever seen a player leave a team, and both the team and the player lost out, as badly as Colorado and Nazem Kadri.
I know it's a disappointing thing because I think that we knew that this was going to happen after Colorado won. They couldn't afford to keep all of the depth that they had, and they did well to keep some of the pieces that they thought were important. Unfortunately, Nichushkin went AWOL exactly the wrong time for this series, but the depth that they had this year obviously was just not comparable to what they had previous year. They tried everyone that they could, rotating in like Newhook and Confer and everyone kind of through their second line center position, and they just didn't really kind of have anything that stood up against what they previously had depth wise and matchup wise.
Yeah. So to go back now to the refereeing, Dallas defeats Minnesota in 6. This was a fight.
Oh, yeah.
This game, this series was just a brawl, and you had moments where the referees decided to crack down, followed by moments where it was have at it, gentlemen, and then back to a crackdown again, and then back to have at it, all in the same game. It made absolutely no sense. Like, it started off as just this really fun back and forward series. And then by about halfway through game 1, there were a couple of hits laid, and you're like, oh, that's a bit... No? Okay, we're not calling. Oh, okay, we're not calling that one. And then there was a response hit. I was like, oh, okay, we're not calling that. And then near brawls descended. And then they're like throwing people out for like really minor things. And you're like, okay. And then it went back to a brawl, and the referees were like, nah, not interested. And then all the way through the series, it just stayed in this weird mixture of really fun hockey and a fight.
Yeah.
But what I was disappointed with was I thought Minnesota was so... I had them winning this series. I thought Dallas... Everyone knows what Dallas hockey is because Dallas hockey is the ball hockey, and we know... Yeah, we know that obviously the ball hockey is a very simple style. But what I found really fascinating was that Minnesota did nothing to counter it. I thought the move away from, the net and moving towards Marc-Andre Fleury was a bad call because their goalie, he won them the first game, and then they rotated and put Flower in for the second one, and that went badly. And from then on, the series sort of tanked for them. And Kaprizov was a non-factor.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, I think, just the timing of, Kaprizov literally kind of came back in game 1. He did say that he was fully healthy, but that, essentially he missed like a month or whatever before that where he just wasn't playing. And that's hard to step back in at playoff pace and be, your usual self. Like, I think that's probably an unfortunate thing that he just got hurt at exactly the wrong time. He also got hurt at exactly the wrong time for a bunch of my playoff hopes in fantasy hockey, which wasn't great. But yeah, just the reality of he was kind of their X factor, and he just didn't have it in this series, unfortunately, and the Dallas top line had it, and that was the big difference. I actually surprisingly picked this one exactly. I picked Dallas in 6, so as one of the few ones that I yeah, thanks for that, Shannon. I quite enjoyed that.
I appreciate the shot, Shannon. I had to put it up on there. So for those listening on the podcast, the comment was I really like the retro gaming systems from when the Sharks were relevant.
Yeah.
We will be relevant again faster than
some of those maybe before they were relevant. Looking at a few,
most of them are before they existed. Anyway,
yeah, I was going to say that's probably true as well.
Yeah, but no, I thought that obviously Kaprizov wasn't right. But the other interesting thing is I think again, Marc-Andre Fleury.
He has such a weird legacy as a player. I think at this point he's pretty much like burnout. He's old. He's like 39 or something at this point, but maybe not that old. He's probably 36, 37 based on that kind of timeline.
He's really old.
But in terms of a goalie,
he's hockey old.
We know what we know about playing butterfly in the NHL is that it is not kind on the body, but realistically, he has such a weird legacy because he single-handedly has tanked many playoff runs, but also has put up insane performances in stretches that kind of have this he is the shittiest goalie that is a first ballot Hall of Famer in a lot of ways.
He's really, it's really interesting, Marc-Andre Fleury, because when you go through his career, his achievements, and what he's won,
Yeah,
he's got, like, in terms of his cup wins, right? He's got more cup wins for not playing than he does for playing.
he does. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's got
He won
more,
2 as a backup.
yeah, he's got more rings as a backup. And, his probably his best season out of all of them was one where he made the cup final and they didn't win.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, he kind of had this weird resurgence after that, where he basically lost the starting job to a rookie, and then went to another team, and then decided to have like a renaissance for like 2 years, and then I think that was kind of the last of like the great hockey that he had to play. I just can't see a situation where he's anything more than like a 905 goalie going forward.
I think we're all missing out. First of all, 905 goalie going forward. I mean, look, Edmonton is screaming for that.
Yeah.
But more importantly than all of that as well, it's a fascinating thing, because I think that the thing that ruined his career the most was when his own agent put a sword through his back, because he's never quite recovered. Like, it's very hard to get down in the butterfly when Alan Walsh was putting a sword through you. Like, I love that his legacy is so complicated that it involves an internet meme created by his own manager. Like, seriously.
Yeah, like, it's bizarre. I mean, look, I love the guy.
Did you see it came back during this series, where people put the Minnesota goalie in and put the sword with MAF on the sword?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's come up a few times now. Anything it happened in other situations too. But he has mentioned. I saw he was interviewed today, I think, and he said that he was interested in coming back to Minnesota. So I'll be interested to see whether or not that happens. I know there's been a bit of like. No, or I don't think they can either. But there's been a bit of talk, around Pittsburgh circles of like, oh, bring back Fleury, it's all going to fix everything or whatever. I don't think that that's going to be the case. I mean, look, they are a team that is desperately in need of consistent goaltending, and I just don't think you're going to get that from Marc-Andre Fleury at this point.
I would happily pay to see him return.
I wouldn't mind seeing him return as a backup.
He's 3.5 mil.
No, well, he's still got a year. He's still got a year, right?
Yeah, and it's a no move.
Yeah.
So he's got to waive.
They can't fit that. They can't do that.
He's got to waive. And by the way, Minnesota Wild's cap space, as we know, because of the retained money and stuff like that, the Minnesota Wild's cap space is not good at all. Projected cap space, 3.418. Ouch. Only 3 million, and they've got lots of players. Like, Matt Dumba's going to walk. We know that this is probably Matt Dumba's last game for the Minnesota Wild because they can't afford him.
That's
John Klingberg obviously won't be back. Philip Gustafson's an RFA.
I mean, this is where the hurt starts for those bad years of the buyouts, right? Like,
this is the one. Oh wow, they've got so many RFA. Sam Steele's an RFA. Nick Patan's he's on contract. Sorry.
I mean, no one of importance there.
No, but they've got like the players coming off the books they've got to replace. Nyquist, Sundqvist, Reeves. Ryan Reeves will take all 3 million. Surely.
Probably
the grit of Ryan Reeves.
Oh God.
You know it's going to happen. Ryan Reeves is going to get all 3 million. Completely.
3 mil minimum. 3.1 is his starting offer. Look, I think that Minnesota's in for some pain in the next few years for sure. But
they knew that though. Like, this was
I don't think many people saw them going far necessarily in these playoffs. They are ostensibly a one-line team.
I had them knocking over Dallas simply because I thought that Kaprizov might be okay. He wasn't.
Yeah.
All right. Vegas defeats Winnipeg in 5. This one
I actually gave Winnipeg too much credit. I picked Vegas in 6.
I think I said Vegas in 5. I had no faith in Winnipeg, if you remember. I absolutely blitzed them.
Oh well, I thought that maybe they would steal a game or two from goaltending, but
so Winnipeg. Look, my thing was I thought that the way that Winnipeg made the playoffs was embarrassing. They literally, it's the definition of backing in.
Oh yeah.
So they literally backed into the playoffs and tried from leading the league at one point. They went on an absolute plummet. Like they flew down to just scraping it at the end. But this was one where I just thought that Vegas would be too well organized. The interesting thing, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the Jets, so I do want to quickly mention Vegas. Jack Eichel was great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Mark Stone was back.
This is the first time that Eichel's gotten to play in the playoffs in his career.
No, I can because he was at Buffalo. So
yes, I obviously that, but like he came in the same draft as McDavid, and this is the first playoff games that he's met. It's fucking criminal what the NHL does to.
I mean, to be fair, Connor McDavid's only just started making them regularly. But apart from that, I don't think we know if Vegas is good or not yet. Because Winnipeg proved nothing.
I think you could have put in any of the teams that missed out on the playoffs up against the Jets, and they would have won as well.
So let's get into Winnipeg. We do have a noted Winnipeg fan listening intently to this. This will be fun. So with that in mind, let's get into this. Rick Bowness, after the last game, in his media availability, he goes
of about a minute.
Yeah, he literally went, we had no pushback. Their better players were so much better than ours. It's not even close.
The thing for me with that, before you go on, it wasn't even prompted.
He just laid into it.
He just walked in and said, "No questions. All right, here's my fucking statement. I'm going."
And then they went, the follow-up was, has this been something that's recent or is it something that's going back for a while? And he goes, it's going back for a while. We've raised that before. I raised that when we were, and if you remember, he had that press conference in January, I think, when he was talking about the fact that they weren't trying. And he was just like, there's no effort. I don't know what's going on here. They're not trying. There's no effort. They're not interested. And laid into the team. And since then, it's sort of fallen apart again. And so he made that comment, said they were disgusting. Their effort was disgusting. They were terrible. Any other questions? No. Good. Bye. Stood up, left. Then they bring the players out and they ask Wheeler about what was said. And Wheeler's comment was basically that he didn't appreciate the fact that the coach came out and said those things in public. He should have said them to us instead. But everybody seems to be indicating that he has been non-stop and that largely there's a bit of a culture, and everyone who leaves the Jets, it's been spoken about before. Is there's a bit of a culture inside that locker room.
For years. I mean, like you go back to like Buffalo and stuff.
And like Wheeler and like this is the thing. Remember, there was a thing where it was all of these other Bufflin was part of the problem, and then it was Kane was part of the problem, but still. But then you've got Wheeler and Scheifele are still there. But every time another player leaves, this stuff leaks out of Winnipeg from the players going, oh, that player was part of the problem. Oh, that player was part of the problem. At some point, they need to acknowledge that Scheifele and Wheeler are the problem. And they cannot do anything with this organization with those two players there. The problem is you've got to get players to come to Winnipeg and you've got to get them to waive a clause to leave Winnipeg. Yeah. And they're not going to get a free ride like they've had in Winnipeg anywhere else. So if they leave Winnipeg, they're going to have to start towing the line and they can't do what they've been doing in Winnipeg because they know they can get away with it because the organization needs them too much. And so we were talking before we started, but it felt a lot like Rick Bowness got up and said all that thinking, well, they're going to fire me. And they very quickly came out and said that Kevin Cheveldayoff and Rick Bowness will both be returning.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the PDO cast were talking about it today, and they were saying that like they felt like it was kind of almost being set up as like here's the narrative that we're setting up for the start of next season. That like this is the thing that we're gonna overcome or whatever. That they're just content to be a bubble team that's like, oh, we're fixing our culture by making these little moves around it. Like there didn't seem to be any kind of committal to really kind of changing anything about it. It's just like, no, this is who we are. We're just going to run it back and we're going to make a couple of changes and that's going to be it.
So the problem they've got going forward is so Shifley's got one more year after this. He's got a modified no trade. He's got a 10-team list that he can submit that he can't go to. Blake Wheeler it's a 5-team list that he can be traded to next year. So he can only be traded to 5 teams. So he's 8.25 against the cap.
I don't think at this point in his career that Wheeler has like a positive value. I think that you have to pay someone to take Wheeler.
Well, that's the thing. And when you watch him on the ice, you see it. The number of times where, especially in that series, you'd see Vegas going up the ice, and it's just like there's nothing. Like that no pushback thing is right. There was no pushback. There was no.
And I think that's always been who he is, which is okay. That's fine. That's some players are just not defensive. Patrick Kane not defensively minded. He does the same thing, but he's just not as good. Or at least especially at this point in his career.
So the things going forward now, apart from those two, you've got Pierre-Luc Dubois, who the first thing that he said when he had media availability was about examining his options as an RFA, and everyone's like, "No shit, we know where you're going. Can we just get it done? You're going, they've got to stump up. Look, if I'm Cheval Day off, I'm qualifying him, and I am making the Montreal Canadiens cough up. I'm making them do it."
Yeah, I mean, he certainly didn't help his trade value in terms of his performance or anything. But then again, none of them really did. The thing for me with this team is, unless they commit to just tearing this down and bottoming out and rebuilding, I just don't see how they're going to get significantly better in the next decade.
It's like, I think the problem that they've got in terms of getting better, it's a little bit like what I said with the Pacific about the Flames are almost going to miss the boat because everyone else is doing what they need to do now, and the Flames haven't started yet. And what I think you're going to see with Winnipeg, like, for example, like Nashville only just missed the playoffs this year. But the last thing David Poyle did before saying, and I'm handing it over next year to Barry Trotz as a general manager, was clear cap space and give him assets to go and rebuild it. So Nashville next year are positioned in a prime spot for the rebuild. Whereas Winnipeg, like, first of all, as we said, the big problem that Winnipeg has is convincing players to go to Winnipeg.
Yeah,
there's a massive issue around tickets.
But I mean, I think that's not a problem for a team that is trying to bottom out, because the reality is, if you're trying to just like sell off and bottom out, and you're bringing in players that have no control over where they get to go.
Yes,
you're drafting players, you're bringing in young guys, you're trading for guys on RFAs or whatever that that don't have any trade control or whatever. Like, that's only an issue if you're trading for impact players. I just don't think that this team is even like an impact player or two away from being a good team.
Yeah.
So that's realistically not a problem for them, because they should be just clearing house.
The problem is though, and I'll bring the comment up on the screen for people who are watching. But if you're listening, the biggest problem is keeping fans and players while they tear it down. Yeah. And look, I said before when I brought up the Coyotes that the Coyotes are not being moved. However, the Jets are in a really interesting situation right now, because when they were brought back, Bettman was absolutely clear that this needs to sell out nonstop all the time. You cannot have a lull. We cannot be carrying you. Now, it's really interesting. People go, but what about us? That's a different that's a media market. That's a media market thing, right? Winnipeg as a market is not as big as, let's use the word, Houston, which is the number one destination that they're hoping that someone decides to stump up the money for, because if the Winnipeg Jets try to bottom out and they don't get the support in the arena, and the fan support seems to be going, and ticket sales take a nosedive, you are going to start hearing the rumblings of, are they going to sell? Now, you've got people who will go, oh, yes, but they're owned by, you see, the richest family. And well, they are. But I don't think True North Sports and Entertainment, I don't think they bat an eyelid if an offer came in for the franchise to move it to Houston, because they're going to get over $1 billion. Because franchises are worth $1 billion. The Senators are going for $1 billion. You would get 1.1, 1.2 for the Winnipeg Jets. If you are rich and someone offers you an extra $1 billion, you take it.
Yeah, it's an interesting factor for, when people talk about like, oh, this team's going to move because they're not, succeeding. Most NHL teams are not profitable. That's not really how it works. Most of them are just a fun project for rich people to fuck around.
Stay as long as your owner wants to keep you.
Yeah, write off taxes and shit like that. Like that no one, apart from a handful of teams, no one is owning a team to like, live off or whatever. That's not how NHL team ownership works, and that's not how really most sports ownership works. It's mostly just for people to have a fucking fun around project.
And unless
so like you look at like oh, they're not selling tickets, they're not filling arenas or whatever. That's not necessarily the things which make a team be sold. It's mostly about whether or not someone is still interested in that product being there and having fun with it and all that kind of stuff. And the thing about like the media markets is like there's a reason that they want to keep these potentially major kind of teams in big US cities and stuff like that, but Winnipeg is an afterthought of a location in terms of like it's easy to sell hockey in Canada. Like any particular Canadian team is not gonna make or break the NHL.
But to put it absolutely bluntly, and I know there are people in the group who will disagree with this completely, what's going to make the league and therefore all of the owners more money? The Winnipeg Jets or a second Toronto team? The answer is a second Toronto team, and it's not even close. Yeah. Now, or any of those markets, because it's a big enough market to support it. You stay as long as your owner is happy to keep you there. Hasso Plattner with the Sharks for years has, whenever attendances look like they're dropping, does the whole, well, if attendances keep dropping, I might have to sell the team. Now, he won't, and they won't move the Sharks because, again, California is a big enough market that they can keep making money. And the idea is once you turn that around, you're printing money because you're in a big enough market. So that saves the Sharks. But it doesn't save the Jets. We know this because they've already gone once. So...
yeah, look, I do think that the first option is to keep the Winnipeg Jets and Winnipeg. Like, I don't think that anyone is like excited around moving around teams and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's not the ideal scenario. But I don't think any team is necessarily 100% safe if the right, environment kind of came up. Like, they're still in the process of trying to sell the Senators, and I wouldn't be shocked if someone came in and wanted to move them to some US city or something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. There's only a couple of teams that you go, well, they're not moving them. And everyone else is sort of, if a rich enough person comes in and goes, I want to put the team here, and puts enough money on the table, the board of governors will go, yep, 100%, we'll do that. Hi, Atlanta, how are you going? Like, this is the thing. Like, you can move teams if enough money hits the table that the board of governors goes, we'll move them. Now, I don't think anyone's going to stump up that sort of money to move the Coyotes, but you might get someone stump that money up to move the Jets, possibly because, again, billionaires like more billions of dollars. So I don't think. Look, I don't.
But again, that's probably another factor that builds into whether or not they would rebuild. Because
that's the problem. They can't.
No one wants to sell a rebuilding team.
They can't, and they've got to get people into the building. Like as you said, the idea is you control players coming in by drafting them, and so they can't go anywhere, and you've got control. But you're not drafting players that are going to make you instantly competitive. So they're in this really horrible spot of they need to trade for contracts where the player has no say. And desperately hope that the player goes
and hope that turns them into some kind of contender. Like I think that's a losing game realistically.
And to make it even harder, Connor Hellebuck's comments at the locker clear out filled all of the Jets with dread, which was, I want to play for a winner and I feel that time is slipping away from me. We are probably in an off season where Connor Hellebuck behind the scenes is agitating for a move.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's 30 next year. I completely understand that. Like, statistically, he probably only has like.
And there are teams that will be looking.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. There's plenty of teams that would love to have Connor Hellebuck at this point in his career. Even with only just he's probably got like 3-4 more good years as as an elite goalie.
There are definitely teams that will look at Connor Hellebuck and go, we could do that.
And if you're being
And
smart, like if you're Winnipeg, like are they going to be a contender in the next, let's say, 4 or 5 years? Like let's say that's kind of his bracket of being very unlikely that that's the case. Like if you're smart, you sell off those pieces and you start to rebuild. Well, I just don't know if that's what they want
a
to
really
do.
interesting, just quickly, we'll move on, but a really interesting and really fascinating idea here is that the Colorado Avalanche have a lot of players to re-sign, 13 million in cap, so they don't have a massive amount of cap space. But if they make a couple of cheeky moves, the Colorado Avalanche could have a look and go, well, we'll send you Alexander Georgiev, and Connor Hellebuck can come our way, and we'll start the rebuild with, we'll do a quick rebuild on the fly with what we've got with McKinnon and Ranton and everybody there, and we'll add Connor Hellebuck in net.
I can't see that happening for Colorado just because they've kind of planted their flag in the sand of like, we don't need $6 million goaltending to win. We won a
until
cup.
You lose to Seattle in the first round.
But that wasn't goaltending. That wasn't on goaltending.
I mean, look, the answer is, and it just got yelled out in the chat, the answer is the Red Wings. And it is the answer.
I mean, there's a handful of teams that are looking for goaltending.
They've got cap.
Pittsburgh would murder someone for
the Red Wings
reliable for Connor Hellebuck. To be honest,
the difference is the Red Wings have cap, good young talents, good young prospects, lots of picks, and it's a Steve Yzerman rebuild. Hellebuck looks at that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, like I'm not pretending that their offer would be similar or anything like that, but yeah.
All right, let's move on.
Plenty of things.
Edmonton defeats LA in 6, and look, it was much closer than the wins in 6 suggest.
Yeah.
Edmonton have officially decided that they are going to try to win the Stanley Cup by just outscoring their opponent, not in like a 1-goal or a 2-goal game, but they're going to concede 6 and 7 and then just try to put one up the other end and score again. Now, we know how this went last year, that it was okay for a round, and then it kind of fell to pieces. Sportsnet stats during this playoff run had a stat that I sent to Brendon while it was happening. It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Big rebound from Stuart Skinner as he put his save percentage up to an 889. That's not a rebound.
No, I mean it is, but it's not a good one. The reality is, like, this series to me boiled down to basically Edmonton versus holding a lead, because at several times they just had literally like a 3-goal lead, and it's like, well, this should be it. In the playoffs, you get up 3 goals. That should be it. Like that's generally how playoff teams, work. It's like, okay, maybe they get 1, maybe in the last minute they get 2, but if you're 3 goals up, you generally win. And they just blew so many of those leads. It went to overtime, then they would lose in overtime. And it really was this situation. They would dominate the first period, put up like 4 or 5 goals, and then watch it just piss away.
A weird statement I'm going to make here, given that Draisaitl had a really good series.
Oh yeah.
And McDavid was good too. But the Kings did a really good job on McDavid and Draisaitl. And it sounds weird to say given the points, but they did a very good job. My whole thing in the preview was that LA is a really bad matchup for Edmonton because they just bottle them up. And then, again, you pick the other lines off. And LA picked the other lines off. And they did a very good job of it. And, like, again, Draisaitl had a really, really, really good series. And I still thought that LA played them beautifully. And this is why when we get to the next round, this is where in my bracket I have Vegas beating Edmonton, because Vegas have more attacking threat but are capable of doing what LA did in the bottle up department. LA don't have Jack Eichel and Mark Stone.
Yeah.
That's it. So, but I think that, look, Edmonton are going to live and die on scoring. If you stop them from scoring massive clumps of goals, you'll beat them.
And like they're going to score a few. That's the thing. Like you're not going to stop.
You're not going to clean sheet them.
You're not going to stop Draisaitl from scoring a few. But if you can limit them and you can score a few more or whatever, like LA almost did it. You're on that back a few times. It very much could have gone the other way.
Yep. Then Florida defeats Boston in 7. Now, I've never been so happy and angry at the same time. So if you listened to the preview podcast, I laid out the exact game plan as to how Florida would beat Boston, why I thought Florida would beat Boston, but picked Boston in my bracket because I'm like, I need to run the odds for once. Normally, I'd make the bold decision. And I went back and forward. And I said in our preview, this will be the closest series that is played. This one will be it. And I think Florida will run them incredibly close, if not beat them. I think Florida will beat them, but I'm going to pick Boston in the bracket because I need to play the odds. I should have trusted the gut because the way that Florida did it was, I said in the preview that they haven't been in any adversity. There's been no pressure put on the goalies, and Matthew Tkachuk was a big difference maker. And it was exactly what happened. Is that the second they got into deep water, you saw the Bruins panic, and you don't see them panic.
It's an interesting factor, I think, in the playoffs that you don't really think about, especially teams that are so far ahead. You know, they talked about all year that they weren't like too worried about setting all these records and all that kind of stuff. But you know, you gotta know that that's a lie to some degree. Like, of course you're interested in setting records and, you know, winning the President's Trophy and all that kind of shit. But really, at the end of the day, what it boiled down to, I guess, was that the last 3 months of the year, basically Boston didn't have to play meaningful games, whereas the Panthers came in playing meaningful games that entire time because they had to win out to get in, and they very closely didn't. Like, honestly, if Pittsburgh hadn't shit the bed the last 2 games of the season, they would be in and the Panthers would be out. That was how close it was.
As we said, Calgary, who are in absolute turmoil,
have
one more point.
Yeah, that's it. You know, it was that close. Like, they were literally Florida finished 17th in the league and they barely got in the last wildcard spot, and they did that by having this awful start to the season and then just playing bare knuckle hockey for the last few months of the season, where every point counted, every second counted. And Boston just didn't have that situation where, you know, none of the games really mattered for them coming down the stretch because they locked up the division, they locked up the President's Trophy weeks out from the end of the season. So, you know, that's already, I guess, sets you back. In the preview, I talked about I thought that Boston would be able to turn it on because they've got these kind of, you know, veteran players. They've been there so many times, and teams like that find a way to turn it on. But I think I was being optimistic there, and the fact that Bergeron and Krejci were not back to, you know, healthy in that series, and they, you know, either played with, you know, injuries or didn't play at all for large parts of the series, obviously didn't help either.
I think. See, again, I all the way through the season, I kept on saying, I don't trust Boston. I don't trust what I'm seeing. I know they've got this record. I don't see it. It didn't look realistic to me. And I was like, the playoffs, I just feel like in the playoffs, someone's going to punch them in the face. And no one's punched them. What happened for me this season with Boston is that Boston got out to a massive jump, and they got so far clear early on that everyone just went, we'll deal with them later. Dealt with themselves and just let Boston go. No one was really worried about Boston. No one really panicked about them. I don't think that everyone else in the league was looking at Boston and going, oh, they're a juggernaut, we can't stop. I think everyone just went, they got the jump on us. Well, we'll deal with that later. That's gone. And I think it sort of what you saw in the playoffs, apart from obviously Bergeron's massive, but that's also speaks to a bigger problem in Boston. If, you know, Bergeron at this point of his career, obviously likely to retire.
It's shocking to me that Bergeron, honestly, I could see Krejci re-retiring again for sure, but Bergeron is not to that point where he couldn't play another couple of years. But
also,
I guess,
just quickly, is there a more Boston player than Bertuzzi? Is there a more Boston player?
No, that's a perfect fit.
That trade worked. He was great for Boston. He was probably Boston's best player.
He was a perfect fit for them, honestly.
What was really interesting was, said Linus Ullmark, and I said all the way through, no one put the goalies under pressure. And
I mean, the problem with that was it sounds like Ullmark played with a serious lower body injury the second half of the series.
And the other conversation that's come out a lot, and I think this is a genuine conversation, is they platooned for most of the season. So what they did was got to the playoffs and went, oh, we have to stick with Linus Ullmark.
Yeah.
And like what they
Even when
needed,
they knew he was injured
as
and
they
not
said,
playing, you
what
could visibly see it. He was uncomfortable playing.
and what they probably should have done was Game 5 probably should have been Swayman to give him a
Yeah,
night off.
absolutely. Yeah.
And then they, Game 5 happens and they're like, well, we can't do it in Game 6 now, so we just got to play him through. And then Game 6 happens and Ullmark has a horrific game in Game 6. And then they have to throw Swayman in Game 7 because they could not go back to Ullmark again.
Yeah.
So I think they overthought it. I really think they overthought the goalie situation, and they should have whereas Minnesota overthought it and rotated when they shouldn't have. Boston overthought it because they didn't, and they.
I think it's such a hard decision, goalie picking in the playoffs like that, when you don't have like a bona fide 100% this is our starter and the backup is a big step down. Because at any point during the series, you're really sitting on this real confirmation bias decision of do I give this guy who I'm relying on another chance and he either screws me or he looks really good, or I screw with this up and then I've ruined that relationship and I can't go back to him then or whatever. You can only switch the goalie once, really.
In many ways the series actually came down to a goalie decision on both sides, because you've got the goalie decision that wasn't made for Boston, and then the goalie decision that was made for Florida when they pulled Lyon and went to Bobrovsky. And it was the clip that went viral where they asked him about pulling Lyon out and putting Bobrovsky in, and he's like, we really like what we've got there in Lyon and he's one for the future, but Bob's been there and he's paid the big bucks for this moment. And they cut away and Lyon is sitting next to Paul Maurice, listening to every word he's saying. Look, Lyon had a good first game. His second game, he was letting bobbles go all over the place. It was like, okay, you've probably got to get the kid out of the firing line. Yeah. But Paul Maurice, who's had a history of bad goaltending in playoff series especially, goes to Bobrovsky, who remembers that his job is to stop President's Trophy winners.
Yeah, pretty much. Bobrovsky is such a weird one. We talked about Fleury before. Bobrovsky is another, goalie who has rightfully earned his reputation as absolutely shitting the bed multiple times in the playoffs, but also has this reputation of just stealing series as well.
That was my other part of the preview where I'm like, it's Bobrovsky. You don't know. It's playoff.
You don't know what you're getting. Roll the dice and see whether you're getting 800 goaltending or 950 goaltending. No one fucking knows. It
was such a bizarre thing. Now, as Sportsnet stats put up, the 43-point difference between the Panthers and the Bruins is the largest upset in Stanley Cup playoff history for a best-of-7 series. This leads us to a question that popped up in the chat, which is, who's been the biggest surprise of the playoffs so far? I don't think it's this. I think that it's Seattle, because I could see this coming. I think Seattle.
Well, I'm gonna come back to that, because one of the teams that we'll talk about soon is the biggest. Well, not the team specifically, but a player. But I'll remember to come back to that.
So let's move on to the one that I know there are a lot of people waiting for. The Toronto Maple Leafs defeat the Tampa Bay Lightning in 6 games. I called this in 5, so if anything, it was a disappointment. But it was such a weird series. The first 2 games in Toronto were mental, because it's a 7-3 loss on home ice to open the series, followed by a 7-2 win.
Yeah.
Followed by going to Tampa and winning overtime game, going back to Toronto and losing, going back to Tampa and winning in overtime to win the series. They won every single game on the road in overtime. Come on.
What? Yeah, no, absolutely nuts, honestly.
Mental. And look, to be blunt, while they deserve to win the series overall, they played better last year when they lost.
Yeah, well, that's true as well. I honestly, personally, I wasn't too worried after the first game. That 7-1, the first one, I think it was. 7-3. 7-3. Yeah, there you go. I think it was 7-1 until the late in the last period, and then put in a couple of goals in garbage time. But realistically, watching that, it's like this happens sometimes at the start of a series. One team gets blown out because they're not quite ready yet or whatever. It's a long series for a reason.
I think my comment in the group where people are like, "Oh, here we go," and I'm like, Toronto always starts slow.
Yeah, like everyone got the engines going when Toronto lost that first one. It's like, here we go, and then they just shut up, like pretty much. Like it's
the next night happened, and it was like, what game?
Quite very quiet all of a sudden. For that was pretty hilarious. But look, honestly, this is exactly how I picked it to go. I picked Toronto in 6 as well. So look, I'm not surprised. But as I mentioned in the preview, like Tampa really haven't looked like the Tampa of old this year. They've had, they had a few good performances by several kind of guys in that team, but just they didn't have the same depth that they previously had. And it wasn't going to be a situation where they just rolled over, teams like they did previously. They put up a good fight. I think it was a fun series and so forth. But boy, does that Tanner Jeannot trade look bad now.
I mean,
it looked bad at the time. But...
I mean, they've got to re-sign him. And apparently he was injured, and they said he was injured. But apparently it's not one of those ones where he was injured, in terms of lightly. They said he was injured about 2 weeks out from the playoffs, and they were like, he was not right, and they just had to get him on the ice. Right. But it's like we forgot to mention with Bergeron. Apparently, Bergeron's injury was in game 82. Yeah. When they were like resting players, and they didn't rest him, and he got hurt in game 82. And like with Jeannot, that trade is not great.
No,
I mean they're going to re-sign him, but you think they're going to re-sign him, but cap-wise, I don't quite see paths forward for that. I think like Tampa should be fine, but they're not what they were. They're going to be a painful team to play, but they're not going to be.
No, I mean, look, no one can stay at that level. Like look,
Kucherov had a terrible series just quietly. He was terrible.
Yeah, I mean, look, Tampa have won 2 of the last 3 cups. They're not going to be too concerned about it. 2 out of the last 4 if you include this year. But they've had a lot of success recently. I don't think they're going to be too mad about it long term. But no one can keep that level of getting to 3 cup finals in a row and just keep getting to cup finals every year.
And from a Toronto standpoint, as we said, most of it, I think most of it was in their heads. And I think that, and again, I think that in a few cases there, it was like people have talked about the idea of the slaying the dragon moment. They've talked about the big difference was they didn't play as well as they did last year. But what they did differently was they played moments differently. So what you got, for example, was you got the 4-1 down in Tampa and coming back to tie it and then win it in overtime. What you got was in game 6, for example, Austin Matthews goes out there and just has a minute-long shift where he's like, no, we're scoring, and I'm not leaving the ice until the puck's in the back of the net. We are scoring. The goal that Tavares wins it on is a broken play. He comes in, he gets into the zone, he goes to play it out to Shen, he misses him, he chases his own puck down, picks the puck up, plays it in behind the net to Nyes, keeps going and just goes, no, I'm taking it, and then does what the other thing that Toronto didn't do at moments again was put pucks on net. They were once again at times trying to pass it in. Like, they do that. They go pass, shoot the damn thing. And what John Tavares did was go, you know what? I'm just going to throw this on net and see what happens. And it went in. So they played moments better than they have played moments previously. They didn't play the series well overall, but I don't think that's important. And I don't think that's a look forward to the next series as they weren't great there, so they're going to be. I think they just needed to get past.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can see the relief in there. You see the video of everyone's reactions on the win or whatever. Like you could,
Sheldon Keefe leaping up for a mile in the air, and Carl Dubas.
Just see like the monkey, jumping off the back, just the the weight of 50 years of responsibility is left.
I thought Kyle Dubas was going to throw Brandon Pridham 4 rows.
Yeah,
And what was great, Jason Spezza steps back from him like, don't you dare throw me. And he grabs Pridham. And it looked like Shanahan, but it wasn't. It was actually Brandon Pridham.
Yeah.
And it grabs Brandon Pridham like he's going to launch him onto center ice. And like Brendon's just there going, "This is happening to me, I guess." Also that's a man that just added some zeros to his contract renewal. Kyle Dubas has just added some zeros. So look, I think the interesting part for Toronto, and we'll talk about it, we'll mention it when we sort of quickly preview what's going on next, is I think Matthews had a good series. Morgan Riley was really good for Toronto and stepped up in big moments. The Ryan O'Reilly trade worked for them, and he was really good. Matthew Nyes has found money.
Well, I mean, they drafted him. You're supposed to draft good players.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I don't think you expect him to come in from the college playoffs at this point of the season and suddenly find himself playing on the Matthews line.
No,
and
I mean,
playing
like,
well on the Matthews
obviously
line.
that's a huge boon for them. Like, especially a team that is as shallow as them in terms of their prospect pool. When you have someone that hits like that, like it's very much. Like Pittsburgh finding like Connor Sherry and Brian Rust and so forth during their playoff run or whatever. Like you can find those players who'll come out of nowhere, out of your AHL team or the minors somewhere, and fill those kind of roles. Like that just shuffles everything down the lineup in terms of depth.
And we now wait and see if Michael Bunting does something stupid in round 2. Anyway, moving on. The Carolina Hurricanes defeat the New York Islanders in 6 games. This was the series of Aho on Aho violence.
There was a period of time where like Aho took a penalty and then the other Aho took a penalty like a minute later.
And then there was the one where the Carolina Aho went to the box for hitting the Island. Yeah. And it was like, as you said at the start of the series, they're fighting over the name.
I think now the Islanders Aho has to change his name. I think that's how it works.
Bob Aho, like something like that.
It's got to be Bob, Sebi or something. Just spell it differently. I don't care.
It has to be something like Bob, because it needs to be a no nonsense name, because Lou Lamoriello will only accept no nonsense names. So look, it was close in terms of the fact that it was like a 1-goal series.
But, I mean, 4 out of the 6 games were 1 goal, and 2 of them went to overtime.
But at no point did I ever anticipate that the Islanders were
putting
them in any real danger. I just thought thought Carolina played well within themselves and just held everybody. And look, sneaky Carolina are going to be very much, I think, a sneaky pick at the moment for just they were well. They've got gears they can move to. And I think some other teams have played flat out and they got gears.
No, and we have, and this is the thing. Like, if they manage to get some guys back, like obviously they've still got Svechnikov out with injury. They had, several guys that they couldn't, play basically. Like, if they'd come into these playoffs healthy with like everyone who they're paying money to able to play, like they would be a much bigger threat for sure. I mean, I think that, look, the Islanders, I think this was a found money series, honestly, really. Like they, we know that the Islanders can come in and just grind out, playoff wins sometimes, but realistically, they basically found themselves in the playoffs by other teams falling out.
Yeah. I think the Islanders consider this a win, making it, and they move on from here. It's going to be really
maybe not so much for Parise, unfortunately, who looked like he was contemplating retirement in the locker room right after their loss. That was
how can you tell? How can you ever tell with him?
I mean, this is the thing. Like, it's entirely possible he'll come back. I think he's 39 next year, but he played well enough in a depth role on like a minimum contract or whatever that he could pick another team.
He's being paid until the end of time, so like he's
well, that's the thing. Like, I don't think it's guaranteed. I think that just the talk of him just kind of like staring at his helmet in the locker room for 5 minutes straight, whatever. Like
stuff. And I mean, Barzal, his playoffs were not particularly great. 2 points, that was it. So like obviously that's a longer term contract, and you look down the road for that one more, but. If you're the Islanders, you're probably hoping that Matt Barzal gave you a bit more, especially if he's supposed to be the team leader. You're hoping for more, and then obviously they traded for Bo Horvat, and you're like, well, you're hoping that Bo Horvat's going to give you production. 2 points again. They just didn't get anything really. Like, and I think
look, that's the thing with like the Canes and the Islanders both kind of have that similar idea of like keeping any decent chances to the outside.
They've got to work out how to get rid of the Anders Lee contract. Like it's a no trade with $7 million on the books for the next 3 years. They've got to find someone to take that thing.
I'm not actually that concerned about that for them compared to like every other like $2 to $3 million contract they have in the books. Like it has that, death by 1,000 cuts.
Well, at the moment, but they're all coming off the books.
Oh,
what they've actually got, it's Josh Bailey's $5 million, Brock Nelson's $6 million, Anders Lee is $7 million, Palmieri is $5 million. Like Pajot is $5 million. They're not being killed by small contracts. They're being killed by $5 million contracts.
I mean, some of those are bad, but there was a point in time where they had a $10 million fourth line between like Cizikas and all of the Clutterbuck and Martin and all those kind of guys.
The other thing is to Varlamov. That's dumb. That's definitely dumb. And Sorokin wasn't great either. So like that's a bit of an issue for them going forward. They've got to make some decisions there as well. And to the last series, the Devils defeat the Rangers in 7 games. Now, I'm disappointed because I don't mind the Rangers, and I had the Rangers going all the way to the Cup final, so there goes everybody. But I am delighted, on the other hand, because all I need is one more series. One more. And the San Jose Sharks get it first. So all I need is one more. That's all I need to do is go one more. The Rangers look like they were going to absolutely sweep this. And then the Devils went and moved Akira Schmidt in net. And
so this was who was the biggest surprise of the playoffs for me so far. That was what I was going to get to. So
I don't think Akira Schmidt coming.
Yeah, Akira Schmidt, if you don't know, is a 22-year-old rookie who is the third string goalie, maybe even the fourth string on the Devils. They went into the season with like Blackwood and Vanacek as their 2 guys. Yep. They started this series with Vanacek in net, and then went to Schmidt, who put up an incredible. 3 games in a row. They won 3 games in a row after being down 2 games. They couldn't obviously close out that 6th game, but they came back today and shut out the Rangers. And look, a lot of that is on the Devils' defensive play, like the way that they've been playing has also been really good. But Schmidt being a revelation for them, putting up a 950 or whatever, that helps a lot. That's huge. I mean, I don't know if he's going to completely shit the bed in the next series and it won't matter, but they don't win this series without him.
Well, to give you an idea, like today's game, Dmitry Filipovic tweeted out after the game, shots on goal, 31-24 Rangers. High danger chances were 22-5 to the Devils.
Yeah, that's huge.
Like, this is the thing. The Rangers, I was staggered watching the game today by how ineffective the Rangers just looked. Like, the Devils looked in the first 2 games like a scared young team that didn't know what they were doing. And then they made the change in net to a young goalie, and it turns out that's all they needed to do. And then the Rangers just, like, and here's the thing, Igor Shesterkin had a very good series. Like, Shesterkin was great. And, even today, he was great. In a 4-0, he was really did.
I mean, look, he's the only reason realistically why they didn't get reverse swept. But
Chris Kreider had to do all of the scoring for the Rangers. Zibanejad was poor. Most importantly, and I banged this drum last year, I'm going to bang this damn drum again. What is Artemi Panarin being paid to do? Because not only did he score almost nothing in this series, 2 in 7 games, but he was just missing. It wasn't like he was trying and clearly there. He was missing the whole series. Why are you paying Panarin if he's not there?
Yeah, and they kept trying to force Kane and Panarin back together, hoping that they would kind of rekindle some kind of chemistry, which, continually didn't work. The kid line wasn't good for them, as it isn't a lot of the time, but every time it's half decent, everyone, shits the bed and it's excitement. But the thing for me is I picked the Devils in 6 in this series for a reason, because, the multiple times that I watched them this year, they were just a much more dynamic, much more interesting team, and the Rangers just never impressed me. And, outside of Shesterkin, it just never seemed like the Rangers had anything going. And, for the most part this year, let alone, this series, I'm not shocked by this result.
Now, before I get to my what comes next for the Rangers rant, which is coming, I'm going to give you the floor because we have one of your favorite pet subjects that you need to talk about. Off you go.
Well, look, of course, on his way out of the playoffs, Jacob Trouba had to hit someone directly in the fucking head. Why is it that Trouba gets a pass on this every single year? I just don't get it. Like, he does this to like 2 or 3 guys every year, and nobody else does it with this frequency. No one else is just getting guys clean in the head on the regular basis or whatever. How is it that everyone else in the league has worked out how to lay a hit without going through someone's skull?
I was pleased to see that the conversation today was everybody pointing out that, yes, in the rule book, it is a very technical, legal hit.
Yeah, absolutely, it's a legal hit.
But what I liked was everybody brought that up and said, but what we're saying is the rule book needs to be changed.
Yeah, it shouldn't.
That's not a legal hit.
Yeah, legally, it's like, okay, well, he was just coming through, and the head was the only place that he could hit, so he's allowed to hit it. Like, maybe that shouldn't be the rule. Maybe the rule shouldn't be if you're lining someone up and the head is the easiest thing to hit, that's fine. Maybe that's not a good idea anymore. Maybe we can look at this sport and kind of go, maybe there's other ways to stop a player that's coming through that doesn't involve giving them brain damage.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the thing for me is that, like, I don't think that Trouba necessarily is intentionally targeting guys, but I also don't think that he cares if he does.
I think the biggest,
it's a predatory hit in a lot of ways because he had nowhere to go. Like, he had train track straight through the middle of 2 Rangers guys, and Trouba comes straight through the middle of it and just cleans him up. Like, it was just unnecessary. Like, it's just not necessary to lay that hit.
The fact that Meyer came back to the bench at the end of the game was mental. And he should.
Well, the fact that, I mean, that pretty much shows that they just didn't do fucking concussion protocol properly.
Yeah, but that was like, that was the comment was like, and he's come back to the bench, and I think it was Myrtle, but I can't remember. I think it was Myrtle who was like on a stretcher.
Yeah.
Like, is he being helped? Is someone holding him up on the bench? Like, I will be staggered if Meyer is actually okay to play the first game of the next round, because that's a concussion every day of the week. He didn't move. Yeah. He hit the ice and didn't move.
And this is what I was talking about before with that whole, like, everyone's favorite defense for this when they like seeing hits is like, oh, I should have kept his head up. Like, in reality, his head was pretty much up.
His head couldn't have been that much further forward up at that point.
There was nowhere for him to go, realistically. And that's. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that we as a game can be better than, you're allowed to kill someone if it's convenient.
I mean, I've said before, apart from the Panarin thing, and this goes back into now the where the hell are they going phase. I said that I thought one of the dumbest things the Rangers did in the offseason was, rather than look to move Trouba, they gave him the C.
Yeah.
And I don't understand it for the life of me. I mean, they have... For my money, they have one of the top 2 defensemen in the league playing for them, and they are relying on Jacob Trouba. I don't understand it. Like, Adam Fox is, again, and interestingly enough, we've got probably the two best defensemen in the league, Fox and McCarr, both out in round 1. But another one I'm going to never make it because he's in Vancouver. But you've got a situation where, like, Trouba's the captain. I mean, the only thing you can hope for really is that maybe they continue their proud tradition of trading Rangers captains. He does have a no move. He does have a no move, and he's got an $8 million contract for the next 3 years, so I can't see that one happening. Look, the Rangers sold the farm for this run. Absolutely sold the farm for this run. And Gerard Gallant cannot be allowed to take this roster forward again. His comment after the game, where they said about the amount of skill that he had on his team, and he goes, yeah, but skill doesn't necessarily win you games. And I'm like, no, Gerard, it does. It really does. And you've got so much talent on that ice. There is no way you should have a team that looks that inept going forward. It is absolutely impossible to put those players on the ice and have them look worse going forward than you did. Like, the roster as they've got coming off the books, the Tarasenko contract and the Kane contract both come off the books.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't think Kane was necessarily on him. I think Kane's pretty washed, honestly, at this point.
Kane was not. Look, he actually wasn't too bad. They've got $10 million in cap.
Yeah.
But this year is the Lafreniere contract year.
Yeah.
They've also got Keandre Miller, and they've also got Borchak as well, and that's going to be a small deal. But Keandre Miller and Lafreniere are going to take up money. You've got
Halak will be gone, so that'll
but Halak's only 1.5 million off the cap, so that's I said, this is 10 million with.
Oh no, I'm not saying that they're gonna necessarily be able to add a lot of valuable guys.
They've got a lot of money tied up in players that should be win now, and also, can I just point out, they've only got 2 more years of what is the most sweetheart of sweetheart deals in the league. They've got 2 more years of Shesterkin at 5.6.
Yeah.
And at the end of the next 2 years,
he's asking for that Westies contract.
Igor Shesterkin is backing a truck up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
absolutely.
saying, fill this.
Yeah,
so
he's asking for Shesterkin's contract at that point in time.
He's taken the Bobrovsky money and then some. So the Rangers have a really tough couple of decisions that they're going to have to make. I still think they could clear up so much space by just finding a buyer for the Trouba contract. Yeah. But they won't. I guarantee you they won't. And the other thing is they need to bring in a coach that's offensively minded. I wouldn't mind seeing, look, if you want a happy hybrid, I wouldn't mind seeing a Boudreau. I'd be okay with that. Or, I mean, there are younger coaches you could obviously bring in, but the last time they brought in a young coach, that didn't go very well. I think they're going to want, again, I'm worried that this organization is going to think Daryl Sutter's the answer.
Yeah.
That's my fear.
I think that would be awful as a product.
I think that Daryl Sutter as the answer means that you've asked the wrong question. And so, like, I worry about what's next for the Rangers because, again, I think Gallant is gone. Drury could also find himself out the door if Dolan wakes up this morning on the wrong side of the bed and goes, what the hell did we just spend all that money for? They could both find themselves out the door. And if they do, this could be a Treliving landing spot. That could be really interesting. So the other interesting part, just quickly before we move on to the last part of the podcast, is that apparently they asked the Devils when they were trying to work out what they were going to do in net, special assistant and St. Louis Blues legend Martin Brodeur was asked, and Brodeur was the one who said apparently Schmidt is the go-to. You've got the guy, it's Schmidt. That is St. Louis Blues legend. I mean, they should be so happy in New Jersey that they have him. I mean, the man's a Hall of Famer for the Blues. He's never had any links to New Jersey at all. For anyone listening in on the podcast, and there are some people who I know are going to listen to this who have not followed the Australian NHL fans group chat. We put a post up the other week. It was about Martin Brodeur, and it was I commented that it was St. Louis Blues legend Martin Brodeur. And I was bombarded by Devils fans with no sense of humor. People were like, do you not know that he was a Devils legend who won cups? No, he's a Blues legend. He played for the Blues.
He played like 5 games for the Blues.
And they were all bad. They did not get it. And it was just a thread of like 30 comments of people saying, you don't understand hockey. And then we started doing it with other players. Then we started doing it with other players who had played 3 games somewhere else instead. Yeah. It just got really funny after a while. But apparently the Devils fans didn't have a sense of humor. So enjoy your win, because the Devils fans do have a sense of humor, because they played the Rangers goal song at the Devils bar at the end of the game. All they did was blare, hey, hey, hey.
I mean, honestly, I'm just more excited to see the Devils play. Like, they've got some exciting players. I want to see Jack Hughes do cool
Devils
stuff.
Canes will be amazing.
Pratt and so forth. Yeah, that's gonna be a real fun series. I'm really looking forward to some of these series, honestly.
So before we get to them, which is predictions, just to point out, the most recent Cup winner left in is the Carolina Hurricanes.
Yeah, in 2006, that's the most recent Cup win. I think the Devils aren't super far behind that. Yep. But obviously, Seattle's never won before. Vegas has never won before. The Toronto famously, 1967, is it? Yes. Florida has been a while. There's a lot of teams here that.
And Marc Messier was on the last team that won for Edmonton. So
yeah, that's it. So it's there's gonna, no matter what happens, there's gonna be a very fresh winner. And honestly, of like the 8 teams remaining, I'm fine with any of them winning. Like, just as a neutral fan, like I don't know. I'm kind of happy with any of them.
I'm not. I very much want the bottom half of the West draw to like collapse upon itself into a black hole.
I understand that. I mean, like I as a like a look, I have my biases as well. Thankfully, most of the teams that I really hate went out in the first round.
my problem for the West is that I still don't believe in Edmonton, and like the Athletic brought out their odds for now on the model, on Dom's model, who are the favourites for the Cup.
Yeah,
and it's Toronto.
Yeah,
and Edmonton are second favourites, and I'm like, bullshit.
I mean, how fun would a Toronto Edmonton Stanley Cup be?
It'd be hilariously brilliant. But I think, look, I still don't believe in, and we'll get to the predictions in a minute. I still don't believe in the Oilers, but I definitely hate Vegas with a fiery passion. I've got this really. I don't want Ken Holland to accidentally succeed by being crap.
Yeah.
And I know he made a couple of better moves, but I still don't want him to be rewarded for years of mediocrity. Detroit fans know what I'm saying there. But the other half of it is that the top half of the West, like, I should hate Seattle because they're in our division, but I don't really care because we haven't been good since they've arrived.
Yeah.
And I don't want the Stars to win on one hand because Peter DeBoer hockey. But on the other hand, they've got Joe Pavelski. So I'm more comfortable with the top half of the West than I am with the bottom half of the West.
There's something in it.
I'm fine with the East. I don't have a problem with the East. So let's get into it, shall we? So the first series that we'll talk about, we'll start with the West. So we'll start with Seattle versus Dallas, which we all saw coming.
How fun would it be, honestly, if Seattle went deep in the same kind of way that Vegas went deep in their first year?
Look, I think the difference might be Jake Ottinger, but I'm gonna make the pick for lols. I'm gonna go Seattle in 6.
I have to lean towards Dallas in this.
I think it will be Dallas, but I'm gonna pick Seattle in 6 because I just want to happen.
I'm gonna go Dallas in 6. No, actually, I'm gonna say Dallas in 7 because I think it's gonna be close. I think it's gonna be real close. But I mean, I may be making the same mistake again because I obviously picked the Avs over Seattle for the same kind of skill reasons, and that's kind of why I'm picking Dallas. I do think that I don't want to underestimate Seattle. I could absolutely see Seattle winning that series, but I kind of maybe selfishly just want to see Jason Robertson go deep, so I'm going to pick Dallas in 7.
I mean, this is the ultimate. It's the ultimate for Seattle. This is the definition of playing with house money. Yeah. So the second series that we're going to talk about is Vegas versus Edmonton. Okay, how bold am I going to be on this one? No, bugger it. I'm going to do it. Vegas in 5.
Vegas in 5. Interesting. Look, I'm also picking Vegas. I think that I don't fully believe in the Oilers, especially after we saw what they did against LA in that last round. Just the constant, loss of leads, and that there's only so much that they can do that. I'm gonna pick Vegas, but I'm gonna pick Vegas in 6.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel. Look, as I said, it's probably going to be a long series, but I
want to see McDavid, go deep and win and so forth. I just don't think that he has. I want
to see them lose again and watch McDavid get more and more frustrated with the fact that Edmonton can't build a winner around him.
I mean, look, he's a boring guy, but I don't hate Connor McDavid.
I don't hate Connor McDavid. I don't hate Connor McDavid at all. I hate the fact that the Oilers just went, well, we've given you Leon. What else do you want? Like, my biggest thing with the Oilers, it's not that difficult to get decent to good players to say, hey, would you like to play on Connor McDavid's wing? And it's not that hard to get decent to league competent defensemen and go, would you like to play with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl? It should.
I think they have gotten somewhat better in that regard, but we're looking at the last, the entire tenure of McDavid's career, and they've just systematically failed to provide that team with a competent bottom 6.
I'm going to comment on it because it popped up Kane, Hyman, and Nuge. Well, Nuge and Hopkins was there before them all, so they didn't put him with anyone. If anything, they put them with Nuge and Hopkins, and also they've reduced his role significantly in the team. Zach Hyman's overpaid for what he is, and is one of the reasons why they can't bring in players to help them out. And Evander Kane's scum. So I refuse to acknowledge Evander Kane's existence as a human being on this planet.
I would very much like to see, some of the best players in the world win, but I can't I don't know. I can't put any faith in the bottom half of that team.
But of those three players, Kane, Hyman, and Nuge, I really, really, really like Zach Hyman's game. But he is way overpaid, and one of the reasons why you can't bring in a better supporting cast is they paid too much money to bring Zach Hyman in. Let's go with the bottom half of the East because we'll finish off with the Toronto one. So Hurricanes versus the Devils. I'm going to go Hurricanes in 6.
Yeah, looking at the two of them, it's hard for me to pick the Devils over the Hurricanes. I think the Hurricanes were the class of the Metro for the entire year, and they're just the better team top to bottom. They don't have any real significant flaws apart from the fact that they produce a lot higher chances and goals than they actually produce goals. This may come down to goaltending. I think there's a good chance that this is one of those series where it's a bunch of 2-1 games where whoever is in net for either team is standing on their head and putting up 950 goaltending, and whoever scores in overtime wins the game. But yeah, I'm gonna go Hurricanes in 6.
Yeah, look, and again, that's if there's going to be one of these games that's actually probably going to end up as a series that's over fast, I think it's probably going to be this one, actually. As much as I've tipped 5 for the others, I actually think this is the one that's most genuinely got the chance of being that series where the Hurricanes just go, oh, that's right, here's the extra gear we've got, and just blow them away. So, and obviously then there's also the question of, is their young rookie goaltender going to turn back into a pumpkin? That's a genuine question to ask. The last series, Florida versus Toronto. I think Toronto in 6.
Yeah. Look, Florida is fun, but I don't know how long you can rely on Bobrovsky, not allowing goals against a high-powered offense like that. I just can't realistically. I can't realistically see it happening.
So here's the interesting thing with Toronto and Florida, and is that I actually think that Boston was a better matchup for Florida because Boston's not an overpowering offense. Like they scored. They won.
Yeah, they win by possession. They win by getting.
Whereas Toronto, if you get like the way they were running their lines for most of the season, and then in the playoffs too, you end up occasionally with a 3-headed beast down the middle if they decide to go O'Reilly on the third. But if they don't, you've got a first line of Matthews, Nylander, and probably Matthews, Nylander, or Matthews, Marner, and then probably Yarncroc on the first line. The second line has O'Reilly, Tavares, and then either Marner or Nylander, depending on which way they go there. And if they then decide that they're going to put O'Reilly back on a third line, that's 3 different lines so that they've got killers for you. Plus, I think that once Sheldon Keefe got over his addiction to Justin Hall, Toronto's defense has been a lot better than people have given it credit for. And yeah,
so I don't want to sleep on Florida. I think that they're better than we give them credit for.
No, I think Matthew Tkachuk could burst the whole series again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that he's going to be probably the big key factor for them. But the reality is, this is probably the opposite of if the Canes and Devils series is probably going to be a goaltending thing, this is going to be the battle of the offenses. This to me will look. I don't know. I expect this to look like the Battle of Florida, where Florida and Tampa, usually play, and it ends up being like last year's, the first game of the series was 7-8, 6-7, and all that kind of stuff. And it'll probably even out towards the end of the series as they work each other out. But I suspect that this is not going to be a series that's won on defense or goaltending, and it's going to be a firepower series. And I just think that Toronto has the edge in that regard. So I'm gonna pick Toronto in 6.
If Austin Matthews has a better series than Matthew Tkachuk, Toronto wins. It's that simple.
Well, I mean, I don't think he even has to. I think that they have more options.
But that's my thing, is that if he plays better than Kachuk, the rest of the team's got no hope.
Yeah,
If
or
Matthews is
if,
out playing,
or if someone else does, or like where they've got more. I mean,
Mitch
obviously they have
Marner,
Barkov. Obviously, there's Barkov. They have Haggy. They have other scoring threats and stuff. They're probably going to be these are probably going to be 6-5 games.
Mitch
but
Marner had a very, very, very sneaky first round where he scored a ton of points that nobody noticed.
Yeah.
Like nobody noticed that Mitch Marner, I think, was on like after 5 games on 9 points or something. Like Marner, just his production is it's effortless, and like you don't like you notice when Matthews takes a game over. You don't tend to notice when Marner takes it over. The puck's just in the net, and like he's just around it somewhere. So I think, I think Toronto's got the ability to break the game open. Having said that, Florida could make it really rough for them. And if Florida came out of it and won, I wouldn't be shocked. But this is also testing the theory that a lot of people, including myself, have had for a very long time, which is once Toronto got over the first round hump, what happens next? Yeah. Are they freed up by the idea that they've beaten that first round thing now and can just play hockey because they're not going to be labeled as chokers if they lose in the second round to Florida, who's not bad? So I think they'll play pretty freed up, and I think it'll be 6, but I think Toronto wins it. So yeah, look, I think it's a really interestingly positioned second round. It wouldn't shock me if we ended up with an Edmonton-Toronto.
No, it's entirely possible. I mean, I'd be happy with anyone winning any of these series at this point. Honestly, it's all gravy to me right now.
Yeah, as I said, I just want entertaining hockey. And I mean, look, I know I've tipped against entertaining hockey by saying that Vegas will beat Edmonton, and I mean, look, I'm going to tell you straight up, if we end up with a Dallas versus Vegas Western Conference final, it's going to be very dull. It's going to be incredibly boring, and you're not going to like it. But the plus side is whoever makes it through in the East, that's going to be a really good series. So with that in mind, that'll do us for this week, and that'll do us for our preview of the second round. We will be back at the conclusion of the second round. As per usual for round 1 for people in the Australian NHL fans group, the game threads will be back for round 2. So please keep your comments in the game threads. We like not having random people posting on the wall going, "Oh my God," and leaving it at that because you don't know what it's about. And there's 15 million of those comments and it gets really annoying. So thank you very much, everyone, for using those threads. Thank you for everyone's engagement. Thank you for your feedback on the podcast, and we will catch you all later.